It was a quiet morning in a small, tidy neighborhood. Birds chirped, the sun shone gently over neatly trimmed lawns, and the streets were empty except for the occasional car passing by. To anyone visiting for the first time, it looked like the perfect place to live. But for the family in house number 27, things were not always peaceful. The narrator, a young parent, had always been careful to follow all the neighborhood rules. Their house was neat, the lawn was mowed, and every trash day the bins were placed exactly where the HOA rules said they should be. They believed following the rules would keep life simple. But in their neighborhood, there was one person who made life complicated, no matter how careful you were. Her name was Karen. Or as the residents secretly called her, HOAKaren. She wasn't just any HOA member, she was the president of the Homeowners Association. And she took her job very seriously, sometimes too seriously. Karen believed she had the right to step into anyone's life, anytime, and make sure they were following the rules. Most neighbors avoided her, but she had a way of finding small mistakes that nobody else noticed. This morning, like every morning, the narrator was sipping coffee in the kitchen, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator. Their child, a curious and bold 8-year-old, was building a tower of colorful blocks in the living room. Everything seemed normal, peaceful, safe. But the tranquility did not last long. The doorbell rang. It was a sharp, unexpected sound that made both the narrator and the child jump. The narrator frowned. Visitors were rare, especially early in the day. Wiping their hands on a towel, they walked to the door and peeked through the peephole. And there she was, HOAKaren, standing there with her signature confident smile. Karen was wearing her usual outfit, a crisp blouse, pressed pants, and a small badge pinned to her chest. She looked like she was ready for a meeting, or maybe a court session. But the most unsettling part was the way she held herself. There was a strange mix of authority and entitlement in her posture, the kind that made people feel small, even if they hadn't done anything wrong. The narrator opened the door cautiously. "Good morning, Karen. Can I help you?" Karen's smile didn't fade. "Good morning. I'm just here to check a few things in the neighborhood." "Routine inspection," she said, her tone friendly but firm. Her eyes scanned the lawn, the mailbox, the walkway, and then lingered on the door itself. "I just need to make sure everything is in order." The narrator felt a shiver run down their spine. They had heard rumors that Karen sometimes used her master key to enter homes without asking. At first, it sounded like an exaggeration, a joke among neighbors. But now, looking at her standing there, the idea didn't seem so far-fetched. "I'm not sure what you mean by checking inside my home," the narrator said carefully, trying to keep the tone polite. "Isn't that a bit private?" Karen's smile widened just a little, almost like she enjoyed making people uncomfortable. "Oh, don't worry. It's all standard procedure. I just want to make sure everything is safe and up to code. Nothing to worry about. I have the keys to enter if needed. It's part of my responsibility as HOA president." The narrator's heart skipped a beat. Did she really mean she could just walk in? The child looked up at the narrator, sensing their tension, and whispered, "Mom, why is she here?" Before the narrator could respond, Karen started stepping forward. "I just need to take a quick look," she said. Her tone was casual, but it carried an unmistakable command. It was the kind of tone that made people feel they were supposed to comply, even if they didn't want to. The narrator swallowed hard, unsure of what to do. They wanted to say no, to shut the door firmly, but something held them back. Maybe it was politeness. Maybe it was fear of confrontation. Or maybe it was just the strange power Karen seemed to have over everyone in the neighborhood. Karen looked around the house as she stepped inside, her eyes scanning every corner. She moved with confidence, the kind of confidence that suggested she had done this before many times. She looked at the furniture, the rugs, the kitchen counters. She opened cabinets and drawers briefly, pretending to inspect, but there was a sense of curiosity in her movements, not just concern. The narrator tried to distract themselves by watching the child play, but their attention kept drifting to Karen. Something about the way she walked, the way she held her hands, made the narrator uneasy. They couldn't quite put it into words, but it was the feeling of having a stranger in their home, someone who should not have that kind of power. Then Karen's eyes landed on a small, personal item on the table, a family photo. She picked it up, studying it closely. "Beautiful family," she said softly, almost as if she were trying to charm her way into the narrator's good graces. But the narrator noticed the faint smirk that crossed her face as she handed the photo back. There was something off. Something controlling. The tension in the room was thick. The narrator's mind raced, thinking of ways to politely ask Karen to leave. But every sentence that formed in their minds seemed weak compared to her bold confidence. And then, just when the narrator thought it couldn't get any stranger, the child spoke up. "Mom," the child said loudly, pointing at Karen, "why do you have the keys? And why are you in our house?" The words hung in the air. Karen froze. For the first time, there was a flicker of surprise across her face. It was brief, almost unnoticeable, but the narrator saw it. Her confident smile faltered slightly. The power in the room shifted, even if just for a moment. And in that moment, the narrator realized something very important: this was just the beginning. HOAKaren was not just a strict neighbor. She was someone who believed she had control over everyone, their homes, and their lives. And standing up to her would not be easy. But one thing was certain: the story that was about to unfold would change everything for this family. The quiet morning had ended. The calm neighborhood had turned into a stage for a battle of wits, courage, and boundaries. And in the middle of it all, HOAKaren smiled, holding a secret in her hand, the master key. Little did she know, this visit would not go as planned. The day had started quietly, but the quiet was gone now. HOAKaren had already stepped into the house, and every small sound seemed louder than usual: the ticking of the clock, the creak of the floorboards, even the child's blocks clattering as they shifted them nervously. The narrator stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, trying to seem calm. But their heart was racing. They had never felt so uncomfortable in their own home. HOAKaren moved slowly, as if she owned the place, her eyes scanning everything like a hawk. She paused at the bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines of the books, then glanced at the framed family photos. Her gaze lingered a moment too long. "Nice collection," she said casually, though her tone had an edge that made the narrator's stomach twist. "I like to know what my neighbors read. Gives me an idea of who they are." The narrator frowned. That was strange. Too personal. Too invasive. But before they could respond, Karen moved toward the living room. The child watched her silently, sensing something was off, but unsure what to do. Karen's confidence was unnerving. She didn't just walk, she glided through the home like someone who had done this before, like she had the right to be here. The narrator noticed her fingers lightly touching surfaces, lingering on the edge of a table, brushing across the armrest of the couch. It was subtle, almost polite, but it made the narrator's skin crawl. "I just need to make sure everything is safe," Karen said again, almost as if reading the narrator's thoughts. "Safety first, right?" The narrator forced a polite nod. "Yes, but maybe we should step outside for a minute? We can talk in the yard?" Karen shook her head, smiling. "Oh no, this is fine. I just need a quick look inside." "Don't worry." The narrator's mind raced. The stories about the master key came back, the one Karen supposedly used to enter homes whenever she wanted. They had dismissed it as gossip before. But now, watching her move through the house with that calm, confident air, the rumors didn't seem so far-fetched. Karen stopped by the kitchen counter, picking up a small decorative box. She opened it carefully, peering inside. "Interesting," she murmured, as if she had found a secret she wasn't supposed to see. The narrator took a cautious step forward. "Karen, that's personal," the narrator said, trying to keep their voice steady. Karen looked up, still smiling. "Oh, I know. But it's just part of my check. You understand, don't you?" Her eyes glinted in a way that made the narrator uneasy. It wasn't just curiosity, it was control. She liked the idea of being in someone's private space, of holding power that no one else had. The narrator felt a sudden anger rise but swallowed it, remembering the possible confrontation. Then Karen's attention shifted. She moved toward the child, crouching slightly to look at the tower of blocks. Who built this? She asked, her tone deceptively sweet. My son did, the narrator said quickly, stepping closer. Karen smiled at the child, but it wasn't warm. It was calculating, like she was testing boundaries. Smart kid. Very careful. You must be proud, she said. Then she straightened up and glanced around the room again, her eyes resting on the door of the study. The narrator froze. That was the one room they always kept locked. Private documents, personal files, nothing Karen had any right to see. But before the narrator could react, Karen's hand was on the doorknob. Karen, wait, the narrator said sharply. Karen paused but didn't step back. Instead, she turned her gaze toward the narrator, her smile widening just slightly. I have the key, she said simply. I can go in if I need to. It's my job. The narrator felt a wave of shock and fear. This was not just boundary crossing, it was an invasion. Their heart pounded, and their mind raced. How could she think this was okay? How could she just walk into someone's home and open private doors like that? The child, sensing the tension, stepped in front of the narrator. Mom! Dad, why does she have the key? Karen looked at the child now, as if noticing them for the first time. Her smile faltered ever so slightly, but she quickly masked it. Don't worry, sweetheart. I'm just checking for safety. Nothing to be scared of. But the narrator saw it, the first crack in her confidence. She was used to adults bending under her authority, not children questioning her. The room felt smaller, heavier, as if Karen's presence had swallowed the air. The narrator took a deep breath and made a decision. They wouldn't let her go further. Karen, this is private. You cannot enter this room, they said firmly. Karen tilted her head, studying them like they were a puzzle she had never encountered. Oh, she said slowly, with a hint of amusement. I see. Standing up to me, are we? The narrator's heart skipped. This was at the moment when the calm morning had fully turned into a tense standoff. Karen had crossed the line, and now it was clear she wouldn't leave without asserting her control. But the child, with wide eyes, didn't back down. Mom, she's not supposed to have the key. She can't just come in. And for the first time, Karen looked truly unsure. The narrator noticed her fingers twitch slightly near her pocket, where the master key rested. A tiny crack of hesitation appeared in her confident mask, a hint that maybe, just maybe, her power wasn't absolute. The air was thick with tension. The child and narrator stood together, confronting a woman who had always thought she could do whatever she wanted. The story that had started with a simple morning visit was about to turn into a battle over boundaries, respect, and courage. And HOAKaren, she didn't yet know that today, her confidence would begin to crumble. The room felt smaller now, heavy with silence. HOAKaren stood near the study door, her hand hovering just above the doorknob. The child and the narrator were side by side, staring at her. The air was tense, electric, almost as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. For the first time, Karen's confident smile wavered. She blinked rapidly, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. It was subtle, almost invisible, but the narrator noticed. This was the woman who had walked into dozens of homes before, unafraid, untouchable. And now, she seemed human. I just need to check something real quick, Karen said, her voice slightly higher than before, betraying a hint of nervousness. The narrator's jaw tightened. Karen. This is private. You cannot enter. Please step back. Karen's lips pressed together. She looked around, scanning the living room, the kitchen, even the small stack of bills on the counter. Every surface seemed to hold a small accusation, a reminder that she wasn't welcome here. Then something unexpected happened. The child, who had been silent for a few tense seconds, spoke again. Why do you get to have all the keys? We never asked you to come inside. The words hit Karen like a splash of cold water. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second. She tried to recover quickly, smoothing her blouse and forcing her usual confident smile back. Well, it's part of my duty as HOA president, she said, her voice trembling slightly. The narrator's heart pounded. They had always known Karen pushed boundaries, but now, seeing her falter under a child's question, gave them a strange mix of hope and fear. Hope, because maybe she could be stopped. Fear, because she was unpredictable, and unpredictable people were dangerous. Karen's gaze shifted to the master key dangling from her pocket. Her fingers brushed it nervously. The narrator realized that this was her source of power, her tool, her secret. Without it, would she still be the untouchable HOAKaren? Karen's movements became sharper, faster, almost jittery. She picked up a small decorative item from the table, examined it too closely, then put it back as if she feared leaving fingerprints. She opened a drawer, closed it quickly, her eyes darting everywhere. The narrator noticed every subtle sign, the twitch of her fingers, the quickening of her breath, the way her eyes scanned the walls like she was suddenly on high alert. Karen, the woman who had made neighbors tremble, was starting to panic. "Karen," the narrator said softly but firmly. "We asked you not to enter. You need to leave now." Karen laughed, but it was a sharp, brittle sound, not her usual smooth, confident chuckle. "Leave? Oh, no, no. I'm just making sure everything is fine. Safety first, remember?" The child stepped closer to the narrator. "Mom, Dad, she's scared. I can see it." Karen turned sharply toward the child, eyes narrowing. "Scared? I'm not scared," she said, a little too loudly. She straightened her back, trying to regain composure, but it was clear she was rattled. Her grip on the master key tightened, then loosened, then tightened again. The narrator realized that Karen's arrogance had finally begun to crack. Her confidence, the kind that had made neighbors obey without question, was slipping. And the longer she stayed, the more fragile she seemed. Karen's eyes darted around the room again, finally landing on a small family photo on the shelf. She picked it up, turning it over in her hands as if studying it could restore her composure. But even that didn't work. She couldn't fake confidence anymore. Then, almost instinctively, she glanced at the child. The boldness in those young eyes, the courage in asking questions, seemed to intimidate her more than any adult confrontation could. Karen's face went pale, just slightly, but enough to notice. The narrator took a careful step forward, their voice calm but unyielding. "Karen, the master key does not give you permission to invade our home. You cannot use it to scare us or cross our boundaries." For the first time, Karen faltered completely. She looked down at the key, then at the family, then back at the key. It wavered in her hand like a weapon that had lost its power. The tension in the room reached a boiling point. The quiet neighborhood morning was gone, replaced by a standoff filled with fear, courage, and the unspoken question, who would break first? Karen's hands shook slightly. She tried to speak, to assert control, but the words came out in a mumble. I was just doing my job." The narrator's gaze hardened. "Your job does not include entering homes without permission. Not ours. Not anyone's. Step back, Karen." Karen's smile, once so confident and smooth, had vanished. She looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape from the situation she no longer controlled. And in that moment, the narrator realized something powerful: Karen was not invincible. The room held its breath. The child watched silently, a mixture of fear and fascination in their eyes. The master key, once a symbol of Karen's unchecked authority, now seemed almost useless in her trembling hands. And in that tension-filled silence, a subtle shift occurred. The narrator knew that the confrontation had only just begun and that Karen's next move would reveal everything about her true character. This morning it started with a knock on the door. By now, it had become a quiet battle of power, courage, and boundaries, and neither side would back down easily. The room was thick with tension. HOAKaren's hands twitched near the master key in her pocket, her eyes darting nervously around the living room. Every corner of the house seemed to press down on her, shrinking the space she had always commanded so easily. She had crossed line after line, but now, she faced the most unexpected obstacle: a child who refused to be intimidated. The narrator's son, only 8 years old, stepped forward. His small frame was nothing compared to Karen's adult presence, yet he carried a weight of courage far beyond his age. Mom. Dad, why do you have a key to our house? He asked, voice steady, eyes locked on Karen. The words hit Karen harder than anything the narrator had said. Her smile faltered, then vanished completely. For the first time, she hesitated. She had always been in control, always the one who commanded attention, always the adult no one dared question. And now, a child was challenging her authority. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. She shifted her weight, trying to recover her usual composure. I have the key because it's my job, she said, her voice shaking slightly despite her effort to sound firm. I'm responsible for the neighborhood. I'm making sure everything is safe. The child's eyes narrowed. No! That's not your house. You cannot just come in whenever you want. There was something in his tone, firm, unwavering, innocent but determined, that made the air itself pause. The narrator watched, amazed, as Karen's confident posture wavered. The master key, once her symbol of power, now seemed like a heavy weight she didn't know how to carry. Karen's hands fumbled near her pocket. She tried to pull the key out to assert control, but her fingers shook. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, unsure of what to say. Her usual rehearsed lines, "I'm here for safety, I'm just doing my job," sounded hollow even to her own ears. The child took a cautious step closer. If it's your job, why do you need to sneak into our home? Why didn't you ask us? The narrator could feel the tension snapping like a stretched rope. Every neighbor's story about Karen's overreach, every whispered warning about her audacity, now made perfect sense. But they had never seen her falter like this. Never. Karen swallowed hard. Her breathing grew uneven. The narrator noticed the slight tremble in her hands, the flicker of panic in her eyes. She started, but stopped, realizing that no excuse could repair the situation. The child, emboldened by Karen's hesitation, spoke again. You are not allowed here. You can't just take our home like it's yours. You must leave now. The narrator felt a surge of pride. Their child, so small yet so brave, had done what many adults wouldn't dare. Karen's confidence, that armor she had built over years, was cracking under the weight of honesty and courage. Karen's eyes darted to the master key again, as if seeking comfort or a way out. But this time, it betrayed her. She fumbled with it, dropping it slightly onto the carpet. It rolled a few inches before coming to rest near the child's feet. The small metal object, once a symbol of her unchecked power, now lay helpless in the center of the room. The narrator held their breath. The child glanced at the key, then back at Karen, and without hesitation, picked it up carefully and held it out. Here, he said firmly. You don't need this to scare people. You can't take our home like that. Karen froze. Her eyes widened, and for the first time, she seemed genuinely afraid. She had expected adults to bend, to apologize, maybe even to argue and give in. But this was new. She hadn't counted on a child showing courage, intelligence, and an unshakable sense of justice. The narrator stepped forward now, standing beside their son. Karen, your master key does not give you permission to enter our home. You cannot use it to scare us or cross our boundaries. You need to leave, now. Karen's shoulders slumped slightly. Her mask of authority was gone, replaced with something fragile and human. She looked around the room, realizing that the confidence she had relied on for years had no power here. Not against a family that stood together. For a moment, the house was completely silent. Even the ticking of the clock seemed muted, as if the world itself held its breath. Then, slowly, Karen backed away, her eyes darting nervously between the narrator and their child. She muttered something about checking the neighborhood, but it was weak, almost pathetic. The narrator's son, still holding the master key, watched her leave. There was a new sense of victory in his posture, not arrogance, but quiet confidence. For the first time, HOAKaren had been called out, and she knew it. The door closed behind her with a soft click, but the tension did not immediately leave the room. The narrator hugged their child tightly, whispering words of praise. You were brave. You stood up to her. I'm so proud of you. The child smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and pride. Mom. Dad. I just told the truth. That's all. And in that moment, the narrator realized something important. Sometimes courage doesn't come from authority or experience. Sometimes, it comes from simply standing up for what is right, even if you are the smallest person in the room. Outside, HOAKaren walked down the driveway, clutching her master key tightly. Inside, the family breathed again, safe in their home, and stronger than ever. Little did Karen know, this confrontation was only the beginning of the lesson she would never forget. The front door had barely closed behind HOAKaren when the family thought the worst was over. But the tension inside the house didn't fade. The master key lay on the floor, gleaming faintly in the sunlight streaming through the window, a silent symbol of power that had once belonged entirely to Karen. And now, it had slipped from her control. Karen stepped back onto the driveway, muttering under her breath. Her usual smooth, confident composure was gone. She fumbled with her purse, clutching it as if it could hide the panic rising in her chest. She had been challenged, called out, and most humiliating of all, by a child. Never before had she felt such a sting to her authority. Inside, the narrator and their son watched quietly, sensing that Karen was unraveling outside. But little did they know just how quickly her panic could turn into chaos. Karen's phone buzzed. She checked it quickly, scowling. She muttered to herself, her voice tight with tension. I have to fix this. I can't let them see me like this. I need control. She fumbled with the master key again, trying to secure it in her pocket, but her hands shook violently. It slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly onto the driveway. The sound echoed like a warning, startling a neighbor walking by. Karen cursed under her breath, red creeping up her neck, and bent down to pick it up, but in her flustered state, she dropped it again. The key rolled slightly toward the street, stopping dangerously close to the curb. Karen's eyes widened in horror. She lunged for it, her movements frantic, almost cartoonish, and in her haste, she stumbled over the edge of the porch. The narrator and their son watched from the window, hearts racing. Karen had always been the predator in this neighborhood, the one people whispered about. Now, she looked weak. Human. Vulnerable. Finally, she managed to grab the key and clutch it tightly against her chest. Her breaths were rapid, uneven. She looked up at the house she had invaded, eyes narrowing. For a moment, it seemed she might storm back inside, but then a strange hesitation stopped her. Something had shifted. Inside the house, the narrator's son whispered, "Mom. Dad, she's scared. She doesn't know what to do." The narrator nodded silently. "Good. Let her feel what it's like to lose control," they said softly. Karen took a few shaky steps back toward her car. Each step was heavy, deliberate, but her hands still trembled. She tried to rehearse a calm smile, something that would make it seem like she had always meant no harm. But her eyes betrayed her. Panic had replaced arrogance. The master key, once a symbol of ultimate authority, now felt like a weight she could not bear. She muttered again, words barely audible, I have responsibilities. I'm doing my job, they don't understand." Her usual rehearsed confidence was gone. She couldn't control the story anymore, couldn't command the room, couldn't intimidate a child or their parents. Every lie she tried to tell herself sounded weak and hollow. As she reached her car, she hesitated. Her hands were still shaking, and she looked back at the house one last time. The family stood in the doorway, calm, composed, united. Her power had failed her. Every rule she had broken, every authority she had misused, came back to confront her in this single moment of exposure. Karen's car door slammed shut, startling the birds nearby. She sat inside, gripping the steering wheel tightly, her face pale. For the first time in years, she felt the consequences of her actions, not from the HOA board, not from gossiping neighbors, but from the very people she had tried to control. Inside the house, the narrator let out a long breath, the tension finally easing. The child hugged them tightly, a mix of pride and relief glowing in their small face. "We did it," the child whispered. The narrator smiled, feeling the surge of empowerment. They had stood up for themselves, protected their home, and shown that no amount of authority could intimidate them. And outside, Karen sat in her car, her master key clutched uselessly in her hand, realizing that losing control could feel more terrifying than any confrontation she had ever forced upon others. The day had started like any other, quiet and peaceful. By noon, it had become a lesson in courage, integrity, and the limits of power. HOAKaren had lost control and in doing so, had revealed the fragile human beneath the mask of authority she had worn for so long. And even as she drove away, the narrator knew this encounter would not be forgotten. Karen would think twice before ever using fear or intimidation to enter someone's home again. Inside, the family returned to their lives, stronger, united, and unshaken, safe in the knowledge that courage, truth, and unity could conquer even the most overbearing authority. The house was quiet now, but the air was still thick with tension. HOAKaren had fled outside, clutching her master key like a talisman, but the family knew the confrontation wasn't over. She might have retreated for now, but her arrogance, her sense of entitlement, was still there, dangling, fragile, and ready to snap. The narrator's son, holding the key safely, glanced at them. "Mom. Dad, she thinks she's in control. She doesn't understand that she's wrong." The narrator nodded. "Then let's make it clear. She won't walk back in here and scare us or anyone else ever again." Just as if on cue, Karen returned. She didn't storm in this time. She stood at the doorway, trying to hide the panic and frustration in her eyes behind a veneer of forced calm. I just want to talk," she said, her voice tight, strained. The narrator crossed their arms. "Karen, we've talked. You've crossed boundaries, and you've misused your authority. It ends now." Karen blinked rapidly. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. She fumbled with the master key in her hand, as if it could give her words, give her courage, but it didn't. The child, standing beside the narrator, took a careful step forward. "Karen," the child said, voice steady and strong, "you cannot just come into our home. You cannot scare us. You have no right. Do you understand?" Karen's face twitched. She opened her mouth to argue, to explain, to twist the story, but there was no way to regain control. Every excuse she had prepared crumbled under the truth in the room. The narrator spoke firmly, their voice calm but unyielding. "Karen, the master key is not a weapon. It is not permission to invade our home. You are accountable for your actions. You may be HOA president, but you do not have the right to intimidate or control anyone. Step back, or this will escalate." Karen's eyes flicked to the master key in the child's hands. She realized in that moment that her authority had been stripped away. The key, once her symbol of power, now lay with the very people she had tried to dominate. For the first time, she looked small. Vulnerable. Exposed. Her confident smile, rehearsed and smooth for years, was gone. She had nothing left to hide behind. I was only doing my job," she stammered, her voice cracking slightly. "Yes, you were doing your job," the narrator said slowly, "but your job does not give you the right to invade homes or scare families. You were wrong. And now, you are responsible for how you fix it." Karen's shoulders slumped. Her eyes darted to the child again, then to the narrator. She opened her mouth, closed it, and finally muttered, I understand." The narrator's son stepped forward and held out the master key. "If you want to help, you do it the right way. Ask permission first. Respect our home. Respect people." Karen took a deep breath and slowly nodded. For the first time, she seemed to hear the words, not just respond to them. She realized the true weight of authority. It wasn't in a key, a badge, or a title. It was in trust, respect, and boundaries, and she had lost all of them in one visit. The narrator watched silently as Karen finally stepped back from the doorway, defeated but aware. The confrontation was over, at least for now. The family had stood their ground, and the lesson had been delivered. Outside, Karen walked to her car slowly, the master key dangling uselessly from her fingers. She looked back once, and for a brief moment, the old arrogance flared then vanished. She had been exposed, And she knew it. Inside, the narrator hugged their child tightly. "You were brave," they whispered. "You stood up for yourself and for our home. I'm proud of you." The child smiled faintly, eyes bright with pride and relief. "I just told the truth," they said softly. "That's all." The narrator knew that the confrontation had done more than stop Karen. It had taught something even more important: courage, honesty, and unity were stronger than fear, intimidation, and false authority. And HOAKaren, she had learned a lesson she would not forget. The house was quiet again. But the echoes of the confrontation, the tension, the courage, it lingered, like a shield around the family. From that day on, no one would ever question their boundaries again. The house was finally quiet. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting warm patterns on the floor, but the family knew that nothing would feel ordinary again. The events of the morning had shaken the neighborhood, and more importantly, had changed something inside the house itself. The narrator sat on the couch, taking a slow breath, while their child sat nearby, carefully placing the master key on a high shelf, well out of reach. "It's safe here," the child said softly, a hint of pride in their voice. "No one should use it to scare anyone ever again." The narrator smiled, a mixture of relief and admiration. "You were so brave today. You didn't just protect yourself, you protected all of us, and our home. I'm so proud of you." The child shrugged lightly. "I just spoke the truth. That's all. The truth can be louder than fear." Outside, HOAKaren's car disappeared down the quiet street. She hadn't driven recklessly, but her usual air of authority was gone. The master key still dangled from her purse, but it no longer carried the same weight. She had been called out, exposed, and most importantly, she had learned that power without respect was meaningless. Inside the house, the family slowly returned to their routines. The narrator brewed another cup of coffee, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, feeling a strange sense of calm. The child picked up their blocks again, stacking them carefully, but now with a sense of victory, as if each block represented courage, honesty, and the strength of standing up to someone who abused their authority. The narrator looked around the living room, thinking about everything that had happened. They realized that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it is quiet, like a child speaking truth to power. Sometimes it is steady, like a family standing together against fear. And sometimes it is simple, like taking a key out of the hands of someone who believes they own more than they deserve. Even though Karen had left, her presence lingered in the house, like a shadow that reminded them all of boundaries, respect, and the importance of standing up. The narrator knew that she might try again someday, but they also knew that no one could intimidate them, not anymore. The family shared a quiet smile, a silent promise that their home was theirs, and theirs alone. The tension that had filled the air earlier was gone, replaced by warmth, safety, and a deeper understanding of each other. And somewhere in the neighborhood, Karen sat in her car, replaying the morning in her mind. She had lost control, she had lost face, and she had lost the illusion of absolute authority. But perhaps, she thought, she had gained something she didn't expect, a lesson in humility, and the painful knowledge that power without respect is fragile. The narrator's son looked up at them, eyes bright. "Mom. Dad. I think we did more than win today. We taught her something too." The narrator nodded, feeling a quiet pride. "Yes, we did. And we will remember it forever." The house returned to its calm rhythm. The coffee cooled slowly on the counter. The child stacked their blocks a little higher. And in the stillness, there was a sense of victory, not just over HOAKaren, but over fear itself. The master key sat on the shelf, a silent reminder of the morning's events. It glimmered faintly in the sunlight, powerless, harmless. And for the first time, the family felt completely safe, completely united, and completely unshakable. Even in a quiet neighborhood, where rules were meant to be followed, the strongest law was now clear: courage, truth, and unity always triumph over control, intimidation, and false authority. And as the door closed softly behind them, the family knew one simple truth: some people may come into your life trying to control you, but the heart of a home, and the courage inside it, can never be broken.